The gavel slammed down with a hollow thud. Sold, 1,200 acres gone. The crowd at the county courthouse erupted with confused murmurs. Farmers squinted at the paperwork, speculators whispered with excitement, and real estate agents scribbled numbers into notebooks. In the very front row, Karen Whitmore, self-proclaimed queen of the Lake Haven Homeowners Association, sat smugly, pearl necklace shining under the fluorescent lights. She crossed one leg over the other, heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks of her authority. This, she whispered to herself, is how you keep property values high. What Karen had done in her mind was nothing short of genius. The 1,200-acre forest that bordered Lake Haven's pristine row of million-dollar homes had been a nuisance for years. Hunters, campers, and, worst of all, locals with rusty pickup trucks used the dirt trails. It was unsightly, a direct insult to the polished image Karen had cultivated for Lake Haven. So naturally, when she stumbled across a loophole in the county assessor's records suggesting the land was abandoned, she wasted no time. With a bit of paperwork shuffling, a few signatures forged for the greater good, and a not-so-subtle bribe in the form of catered lunches for the zoning board, the deed was processed and put up for auction. Karen bought it for pennies on the dollar. Her plan was simple: bulldoze the forest, put up luxury condos, and rename the area Lake Haven Estates, Phase II. But what Karen hadn't accounted for was the actual owner of that land. A man named Clyde Barrett. And Clyde wasn't just any man. He was 6'4", ex-military, with a temperament forged by losing his family farm to slick developers back in the 90s. He wasn't about to let it happen again. 3 days later, Karen stood at the head of the monthly HOA meeting, laser pointer in hand, gesturing at a PowerPoint slide titled, "Securing Our Future, Expansion of Lake Haven." "This acquisition," she declared, "ensures that our property values will rise at least 20% in the next year. Think bigger driveways, think gated entry, think exclusivity." The homeowners nodded politely, though several shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Karen's vision was always a little more aggressive than theirs. One woman raised her hand timidly, but wasn't that land privately owned? Karen let out her trademark laugh, sharp, rehearsed, and condescending. "Oh, Marjorie, everything is privately owned until someone with vision makes better use of it. Trust me, we're saving Lake Haven from rural decay." The room chuckled nervously. Nobody dared to challenge Karen outright. Nobody except Clyde. He walked in halfway through the meeting, slamming the double doors open so hard the hinges squealed. Muddy boots tracked dirt across the HOA clubhouse's freshly polished marble. The man's shoulders filled the doorway, and the quiet murmurs turned into gasps. "Which one of you," Clyde's voice rumbled like thunder, "sold my land?" Karen froze. For a fraction of a second, she considered blaming the treasurer or even faking ignorance. But her ego was too strong. She raised her chin. "I did," she said coolly. "And if you have a problem, I suggest you speak with the county assessor's office." Clyde's eyes locked onto hers. "Oh, I will, but before I do, let's just say you've started something you won't be able to finish." By the following week, Clyde had lawyers crawling all over the county clerk's office. The sale was frozen, lawsuits were filed, and suddenly Karen found herself spending late nights shredding HOA records just in case. Her carefully curated empire was cracking. And that's when she decided to escalate. If Clyde wanted to play dirty, she'd show him just how dirty she could get. Karen remembered something. The HOA bylaws she herself had rewritten in 2012 to be more her wide authority over community assets in cases of financial emergency. She used the rule before to justify things like fining a neighbor $500 for painting their mailbox the wrong shade of beige. But now she realized she could take it much further. That's when she hatched the idea that would change everything. If Clyde thought she had stolen his land, then she would steal something of his in return. And she knew exactly how to do it. Lake Haven wasn't just homes. It was the lake itself. 5 miles of glittering shoreline lined with houses valued between $5 and $10 million each. Karen had spent years bullying, cajoling, and finding her way into controlling nearly all of the homeowners on that strip. They hated her, yes, but they obeyed her because the HOA technically owned the communal lakefront rights. And in a twist of legal brilliance, or insanity, Karen realized she could liquidate those rights. Not the houses themselves, of course. That would be too obvious. But the access rights, the communal amenities, the package of privileges that made the home so valuable, those were under her authority. And so, behind closed doors, with a notary who looked the other way after being promised a brand new Lexus, Karen sold off the HOA's lakefront rights to a private developer. The next morning, homeowners awoke to find men in hard hats hammering "No trespassing" signs onto their docks. Panic erupted. Home values plummeted overnight. The residents stormed Karen's front lawn demanding answers. Karen, standing on her porch with a mimosa in hand, simply smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good." But deep down, for the first time in years, Karen felt something unusual, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel since her rise to HOA power. Fear. Because Clyde wasn't done yet, and neither were the homeowners. The first strike came at dawn. Karen awoke to the sound of chainsaws echoing across Lake Haven. For a fleeting moment, she smiled, imagining her luxury condo plans finally in motion. But when she pulled aside the curtains, her jaw locked. It wasn't construction crews, it was Clyde. The man had rolled in overnight with a convoy of pickup trucks and a dozen locals from the county, friends, cousins, maybe mercenaries, for all Karen knew. They weren't cutting down forest trees. They were cutting power poles. By 7 a.m., the entire gated community of Lake Haven sat dark. Refrigerators hummed their last, garage doors wouldn't open, and sprinklers froze mid-cycle. Karen stormed out in her silk robe, hair still in rollers. "You can't do this," she shrieked across the cul-de-sac. Clyde turned slowly, chainsaw in one hand, a thermos of coffee in the other. "Funny, that's exactly what I told you." The residents rallied quickly, but not around Karen. By noon, furious homeowners packed the HOA clubhouse demanding answers. Their million-dollar kitchens were useless without power, their Teslas sat dead in the driveways, and worse, without refrigeration, the organic kale supply was compromised. "Karen," shouted Mark Ellison, owner of a $9.4 million waterfront estate. His face was red enough to match his golf shirt. "You said our property values would go up. Instead, my dock has a padlock, my kids are crying, and my wife is threatening divorce because she can't make her oat milk lattes." The crowd erupted. Someone threw a biscotti at Karen's head. She raised both hands, calm but firm, like a politician in control of a scandal. "Listen to me. This is all part of the process. Do you want to be part of a visionary expansion project or remain trapped in a backwater swamp of mosquitoes and rednecks?" "Rednecks like him?" shouted Marjorie, pointing out the clubhouse window at Clyde, who stood on the roadside grinning, holding a giant cardboard sign that read, "Ask Karen who owns your lake now." The room went quiet. Karen felt the silence like a blade. That night, Karen poured herself a second glass of wine and studied the HOA bylaws by lamplight. The residents were turning on her, Clyde was escalating, and the county had yet to make a ruling on the land ownership lawsuit. She needed leverage. Her eyes fell on Section 14, Paragraph C. In the event of community endangerment or asset devaluation, the board reserves the right to take protective measures on behalf of all members. Karen smirked. Protective measures. By midnight, she was drafting a new set of emergency fines. Every homeowner who complained publicly, $1,000 per infraction. Unauthorized contact with Clyde or his crew, $2,500. Lawn not mowed within regulation standards, triple fine. By 2 a.m., the documents were notarized and slipped under each homeowner's door. By 8 a.m., the revolt began. Residents lined up outside Karen's house with shredded fine notices, waving them like battle flags. "This is extortion," someone yelled. Karen stood proudly on her porch again, but this time without the mimosa. She gripped a megaphone like a general addressing troops. "It's called leadership," she said. "If you want to hand over your futures to a hillbilly with a chainsaw, be my guest. But as long as I am HOA president, order will prevail." "Order," shouted a man from the back. "You sold our lake rights." The crowd roared. One woman hurled a garden gnome at Karen's porch railing. And then, like a scene out of a bad reality show, Clyde appeared again, this time pulling a flatbed trailer with a billboard strapped on top. It read, "Karen sold you out, ask me how." The billboard rolled right down Lake Haven Boulevard, honking horns and blasting country music. The residents cheered. For the first time, Karen realized she wasn't the most powerful person in Lake Haven anymore. The next week was chaos. Clyde filed motion after motion, digging into the HOA's financials. Lawyers subpoenaed Karen's private emails, where she had casually referred to homeowners as a herd of sheeple who need fencing. At the same time, the private developer Karen had sold the lake rights to Calder in a fury. "These people are animals," the man barked over the phone. "They're blocking our survey crews, spray painting obscenities on our trucks. Do you understand liability? Do you understand lawsuits?" Karen swirled her wine and leaned back in her chair. "Calm down, Peter. They'll fold once they see resistance is futile. Just keep building fences and posting signs." But deep down, her gut churned. Clyde wasn't folding, the homeowners weren't folding. And now even her inner circle, the HOA board, was showing cracks. Trevor, her long loyal treasurer, cornered her after a late-night meeting. "Karen, we've got a problem. The homeowners are talking recall. If they hit 51% signatures, you're out. And with the financial mess from the lake rights sale, you could be personally liable." Karen fixed him with her coldest glare. "Trevor, listen to me carefully. Do you think these people have the spine to lead? Do you think they could manage budgets, enforce rules, or even pick the right shade of beige for a mailbox? No, they need me." Trevor swallowed, nodded, but his eyes betrayed fear. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she knew it. The final blow came at the next HOA meeting. Karen walked in, heels clicking like gunshots, prepared to steamroll dissent as always. But instead of the usual polite murmurs, she was met with thunderous applause. Applause not for her, but for Clyde, who sat casually at the head of the table. "How dare you?" Karen hissed. Clyde grinned. "Relax, princess, I'm not on your board, I'm just here to make an announcement." He stood, towering over the room. "Starting next month, I'll be offering every homeowner here a buyout. I'll give you fair cash for your house, wipe away any HOA obligations, and you'll never have to deal with Karen again. Or, you can stay, keep paying fines, and watch your property values tank even further." Gasps filled the room. Homeowners whispered feverishly, weighing the offer. Karen slammed her binder shut. "This is illegal. You can't just walk in here and undermine my authority." Clyde leaned down close, his voice low but cutting. "You stole my land. I'm just returning the favor." For the first time in her reign, Karen retreated from the clubhouse without applause, without control, and without her usual smug composure. Her empire wasn't just threatened, it was collapsing. But as she sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles whitened, Karen's mind turned not to defeat but to revenge. If Clyde wanted war, then war he would have. And Karen was about to play her deadliest card yet. Karen always said she worked best under pressure. But as she sat in her home office surrounded by stacks of HOA paperwork, shredded notices spilling out of trash bins, and legal threats piling on her desk like junk mail, she realized something terrifying. Clyde was winning. And nobody beat Karen Whitmore. She opened her secret folder, a manila envelope labeled HOA Nuclear Options. It contained strategies she had carefully crafted over years of dominance, ideas so extreme she swore she'd never use them unless cornered. Well, she was cornered now. The next morning, homeowners woke to new signs plastered on every lamppost, mailbox, and clubhouse door. Mandatory compliance inspections, SDRTING immediately. Karen had enacted the Emergency Beautification Protocol, an obscure rule buried on page 347 of the bylaws. It gave her authority to inspect any property without notice if community value was under threat. She weaponized it instantly. By noon, her clipboard army, volunteers bribed with Starbucks gift cards, was marching from yard to yard, measuring grass with rulers, peering into garages, photographing patio furniture. Within hours, fines rained down like artillery fire. One man was fined $500 because his deck stain was an unauthorized shade of cedar. Another was hit with $1,200 for insufficient symmetry in his front yard landscaping. A family with 3 kids got $2,000 for excessive toy clutter visible from the street. The residents rioted. Karen's lost her damn mind. shouted Mark Ellison, waving a stack of fines in the air. No, Karen replied smoothly at the emergency meeting she herself had called. Karen has saved you. These inspections are necessary to maintain order and show strength against outside threats. If Clyde thinks we're weak, he wins. But as she spoke, she could feel the room turning. Even Trevor, her once loyal treasurer, avoided her gaze. Clyde struck back hard. The very next morning, a drone buzzed over Lake Haven, dropping leaflets like it was wartime. Homeowners ran outside, catching papers that read in bold red font. Karen sold your lake. Karen FINED your KIDS. Karen is next. The neighborhood erupted in cheers as Clyde's pickup convoy drove by, honking horns, tossing free barbecue sandwiches to anyone who waved. The smell of smoked brisket drifted through the air, a cruel counterattack to Karen's no pets, no grilling, no fun policies. By evening, half the community had yard signs. Dump Karen, save our homes. Karen watched from her bay window, seething. This is propaganda, she muttered. They'll thank me later. But inside, her confidence cracked. That night, Karen hosted a special board meeting in her dining room. Only 3 board members showed up. Trevor, the treasurer, sat stiffly with his laptop. Marjorie, secretary, chewed her lip nervously. And Ted, the vice president, was already halfway through a bottle of Chardonnay. Karen slapped down a thick stack of papers. I've prepared a solution. We'll invoke eminent domain. Trevor's jaw dropped. That's a government power, Karen. We're just an HOA. Correction, Karen said sharply. We are Lake Haven's governing body. If the county can seize land for highways, we can seize property for community stability. You want to confiscate houses? Marjorie gasped. Karen smiled. Not houses, docks, boats, jet skis, anything tied to the lakefront. Clyde can't buy out what we already control. Ted raised his wine glass. That's insane. Karen's eyes glittered. It's brilliant. The following week, HOA contractors arrived at sunrise with tow trucks and chains. They began seizing anything remotely connected to the lake. Luxury pontoon boats were hauled out like contraband. Jet skis were stacked in the clubhouse parking lot. Even kayaks were tagged with HOA property, do not remove. Homeowners screamed, pleaded, called their lawyers. One elderly man lay across his dock sobbing as workers unbolted it plank by plank. Karen stood in her golf cart, clipboard in hand, wearing aviator sunglasses like a general surveying victory. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced through a bullhorn, this is for your own protection. The backlash was instant and volcanic. Videos of the dock raids went viral online under hashtags like Karen seized my boat and HOA dictator. News vans swarmed the gates of Lake Haven, reporters jostling for interviews. Karen, of course, welcomed the cameras. Strong leadership always looks tyrannical to the weak, she declared on live television, flipping her hair. But Clyde was already preparing his counterstrike. 2 days later, Karen returned home to find her front yard covered in hundreds of pink plastic flamingos. A massive banner stretched across her lawn reading, "Free the DOCKS." She stormed out in her heels, ripping flamingos out of the ground, screaming at the top of her lungs. Neighbors gathered, phones recording, laughter spreading like wildfire. And then Clyde himself appeared at the end of the street, sitting in a lawn chair, sipping sweet tea, watching her meltdown with a grin. "Careful, Karen," he called. "You're starting to look unhinged." Karen hurled a flamingo at him. It bounced harmlessly on the pavement. The crowd roared with laughter. For the first time in years, Karen didn't look like the queen of Lake Haven. She looked ridiculous. But later that night, alone in her study, Karen wasn't laughing. Her power was slipping through her fingers. The homeowners hated her, the board was plotting against her, and Clyde was beating her at every turn. She poured herself another drink, staring at the shredded bylaws on her desk. And then a thought, a dangerous, intoxicating thought. If they wanted war, she would give them war. She would burn it all down before letting Clyde or anyone else win. Her hand trembled as she picked up her phone. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Hello," she whispered when the voice answered. "It's Karen. I think it's time we put the nuclear option on the table." Silence, then a chuckle on the other end. "About time." Karen leaned back, eyes gleaming with dangerous resolve. The HOA war was about to explode. Karen always thought of herself as untouchable, but in the weeks since Clyde showed up, her empire had turned into rubble. The lakefront rights gone, the homeowners mutinous, the HOA board fractured. But Karen wasn't the kind of woman who went down quietly. No, if she was going to fall, she would drag everyone with her. That was the point of the nuclear option. 2 nights later, Karen marched into the Lake Haven clubhouse like a general entering a war room. Behind her trailed 2 men in dark suits carrying briefcases. The board members sat stiffly around the table, dreading whatever spectacle she had planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen said, snapping her fingers. One of the men opened his case and spread papers across the table. "Meet my new partners, Horizon Development Group." Trevor blinked. "You sold more land." Karen smirked. "Not land, all of Lake Haven." The room erupted. "What? You can't do that. This is insanity." Karen raised her hand, silencing them. Under Section 14 of the bylaws, the HOA owns communal infrastructure, roads, clubhouse, security gates. I've signed over a 50-year management lease. Horizon now owns enforcement rights, collection rights, and eviction rights. We are no longer a neighborhood. We are a corporation. The room went dead quiet. Then Ted, drunk as usual, slurred, "So basically, you sold us to a mob." Karen's smile sharpened. "Not a mob, a machine." The very next morning, the changes began. Horizon trucks rolled in with security guards, clipboard crews, and lawyers. Homeowners found barcodes stapled to their mailboxes. Guards patrolled the gates with radios, scanning cars like it was a military checkpoint. Fines weren't just mailed anymore. They were collected in person, with interest. A woman who refused to pay was escorted out of her home while her neighbors filmed in shock. The community was terrified. And yet, Karen felt powerful again. Watching residents scatter like ants while Horizon men posted notices filled her with vindication. "This," she whispered from her golf cart throne, "is control." But Clyde wasn't intimidated. In fact, he seemed amused. He drove straight through the checkpoint in his mud-splattered truck, guards waving helplessly as he barreled past. Parking in the clubhouse lot, he climbed onto his roof with a bullhorn and announced, "Attention, Lake Haven prisoners, I'm offering sanctuary. Sell to me, move out, and I'll buy back your dignity. Stay here and Karen and her corporate thugs will bleed you dry." The crowd erupted in cheers. Karen stormed outside, Horizon guards flanking her. "Arrest him," she screamed. But Clyde jumped down, laughing. "Go ahead, put your hands on me. Let's see how the county sheriff feels about corporate goons running an HOA." The guards hesitated. Nobody wanted that smoke. Karen's face burned red as Clyde walked away, high-fiving homeowners. That night, the revolt hit its peak. Dozens of residents gathered on the lakefront, torches in hand, chanting, "Dump Karen, dump Horizon." The chants grew louder, angrier, echoing across the water. Horizon guards tried to disperse them, but the crowd only swelled. Someone hurled a rock through the clubhouse window. Karen stood on the balcony, wine glass in hand, watching her kingdom burn. She turned to Trevor, who had come to plead one last time. "You have to stop this, Karen. People are terrified. Families are packing to leave. If Horizon stays, there won't be a community left to rule." Karen's eyes narrowed. "If they leave, good riddance. Lake Haven was always meant to be exclusive. I'll build anew without the weak." Trevor shook his head. "You've lost it." He walked away. For the first time, Karen felt something crack. Not fear, not doubt, but loneliness. And still, she couldn't let go. The climax came the following morning. Karen woke to the thunder of engines. She rushed outside to see a convoy of Clyde's trucks rolling down Lake Haven Boulevard, hauling boats, docks, and even furniture from families who had already sold to him. Dozens of homes stood empty, curtains flapping in the breeze, for sale signs hammered into pristine lawns. And the homeowners who remained, they weren't on Karen's side. They lined the street, cheering Clyde's caravan, flipping Karen off as he passed. One woman shouted, "We'd rather live in trailers than under you." Clyde stopped his truck in front of Karen's mansion. He climbed onto the hood, looking down at her like a conqueror. "You wanted a war," he said through the bullhorn. "Well, you just lost one." The crowd roared. For the first time in her life, Karen had no words. That evening, the sheriff's office arrived with court papers. The county judge had ruled. Clyde's land sale stood void. Horizon's contract was under investigation, and Karen was personally liable for damages caused by her misuse of HOA funds. Neighbors celebrated as if liberated from a dictatorship. Fireworks popped over the lake. Clyde grilled burgers for the entire community. And Karen. She sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by unopened wine bottles and stacks of lawsuits. Her phone buzzed with angry voicemails. Her pearl necklace lay snapped on the counter. But as she stared at the chaos she had created, a strange smile crept across her face. Because in her mind, it wasn't over. She had survived too many storms to believe this was truly the end. She whispered to herself almost lovingly, "They'll regret crossing me, all of them, I'll be back." And somewhere outside, across the dark lake, Clyde lit a cigar and stared at her house, as if he knew the war wasn't finished. The battle for Lake Haven had ended, but the war for Karen's empire had only just begun.